Hey guys, tonight we turn our attention to the extraordinary endurance and resilience of medieval peasants, ordinary people who became quiet icons of survival, enduring some of the harshest and coldest nights history has ever recorded. From resourceful insulation techniques to shared sleeping arrangements, their ingenuity, determination, and strength tell a story worth remembering. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now go ahead, dim the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for a bit of gentle ambiance, and let's slip comfortably into tonight's journey together. Picture this. It's the dead of winter. Snow is piled high outside your tiny hut, blowing in through every crack in the walls. The wind howls like a pack of wolves, or maybe like your neighbors if they've been up all night coughing. Inside, the room is dark, cramped, and smells faintly of smoke and last night's stew. You wake up on a bed of straw, which is meant to be insulation, but honestly feels like lying on a frozen hay pancake. Your blanket is patchy, scratchy wool, full of holes, and probably hosting more bugs than you can see. And your toes? Well, your toes feel like frozen carrots. Not the fun kind you roast in the oven, the icy, bitter kind that makes you question life choices. You try to sit up, but your joints creak like the floorboards beneath you. Every movement sends a shiver through your body, and you realize it's going to be a long, cold day. Outside, villagers are already moving, bundled in layers of wool, boots stuffed with straw, gloves that barely cover their fingers. They shuffle along like snow-dusted zombies, grumbling about chores, cows, and the ever-present threat of frozen water. And here's the thing, there's no coffee machine, no heating system, no cozy mattress that adjusts to your spine, just this harsh, bitter reality of winter survival. Can you imagine waking up like this every single day for months? Comment below if you've ever been so cold you thought about skipping life for a while. I want to see if your winter complaints stack up against a medieval peasant's reality. And don't worry, we're just getting started. By the end of this journey, you're going to understand exactly what it took to survive, and maybe appreciate your heated blanket a little more. Next, we're going to walk through a day in the life of a medieval peasant. You'll see how they dressed, what they ate, and how they dealt with the kind of cold that makes your modern winter coats feel like t-shirts. So, settle in and let's start layering up medieval style. You've survived the initial shock of the frozen straw mattress. Congratulations! Most people would have just curled up and hoped for spring. But you're a medieval peasant, so that's not an option. No, your day begins with the cold, biting reality that you have chores, animals, and survival tasks waiting outside. The first thing you notice is the silence, not the peaceful kind. This is a heavy, icy silence that presses against your ears and makes the wind seem louder. Every creak of the roof, every groan of frost settling against the walls, it's amplified in the stillness. And somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, because apparently medieval roosters have no concept of mercy. Now comes the daily ritual of dressing. And I say ritual because it's practically ceremonial. You start with a linen undertunic, thin, stiff, and damp from last night's sweat. On top of that, you layer a heavier wool tunic, maybe a second wool tunic if you're lucky, or if your older sibling didn't claim it first. Then your legs, linen leggings first, wool over that, leather boots stuffed with straw, and sometimes extra cloth if frostbite has claimed a friend's toes before. Don't forget your hat, usually made of scraps of fur or wool. Gloves? Optional, but not really, because frostbite is a cruel teacher. And if you're still cold, congratulations, you just invented medieval layering for survival. You'd look ridiculous to a modern eye, but hey, it works. You step outside and immediately regret every life decision that brought you here. The cold is physical, a punch in the chest, a stabbing in the fingers. Your breath hangs in the air like ghostly smoke. Snow crinkles beneath your boots, sometimes hiding frozen puddles that are waiting to soak through your socks. Every sound is louder in the winter. A branch snapping under weight seems like a warning. A distant bell tolls, or maybe it's just the wind through the village buildings. And everywhere there's that smell, a mix of smoke, animal dung, wet straw, and a hint of frozen earth. It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's pungent enough to make modern noses recoil. Your first job, the animals. Chickens are pecking at frozen ground, goats bleating for attention, cows stamping impatiently. You shove straw into their stalls to give them insulation. You break up ice in the water troughs. If you're lucky, some of the water survived the night. If not, tough luck. They drink slushy puddles. Every task is a battle with the cold. Wood for the fire is frozen solid. Water buckets ice cold. The morning sun barely warms anything. By the time you finish chores, you're wet, muddy, and still painfully cold. But hey, you're alive. That counts for something. Breakfast is next. Usually it's whatever survived the night. Maybe some cold porridge, stiff, pasty, and full of grains that have been soaking in water overnight. Maybe a slice of bread that's harder than the tools you'll use today. And don't forget the smell. Tangy, slightly sour, with a hint of smoke. You eat slowly, because cold fingers make gripping a spoon or bowl a challenge. Sometimes you can't feel your lips. Sometimes your teeth chatter so hard it's like chewing marbles. And if you're lucky, you have a small jug of ale or watered-down milk. Not enough to heat you, but enough to make the morning slightly less miserable. Once breakfast is done, you make your way to the fields. 10 minutes, maybe 20, depending on the snow, depending on how slippery the paths are. Your boots crunch and slip. Your breath makes little clouds that freeze instantly. Along the way, you pass neighbors doing the same, trudging, muttering, trying not to think about how many hours remain before sunset. Every hill feels twice as steep. Every step seems to pull your body down into the frozen earth. And yet, this is life. You push forward because there's no alternative, no job, no work, no survival. You finally reach the field, and now the real work begins. Depending on the season, you're planting, digging, repairing fences, or chopping wood. Every tool is icy. Every handle burns your hands. Gloves help, but not much. And your body, well, your body is slowly realizing that winter doesn't care about your schedule. By mid-morning, your joints ache, your feet are numb, your fingers sting, but you keep moving. If you stop, frostbite moves in faster than gossip in a village. And trust me, frostbite does not wait politely. You've learned this already, or you wouldn't still be standing. Even in the cold, community matters. Other peasants are nearby, similarly hunched over, faces red from cold and wind. Brief exchanges happen. A grunt here, a joke there. Dark humor, of course. Laughter in winter is survival. Someone says, "Better frozen than dead," and everyone nods, because it's true. Sometimes news spreads. Someone's cow froze in the night. Someone else's barn collapsed under snow. Tales of frostbitten fingers, lost firewood, and near misses. These stories are shared not for entertainment alone, but as instruction. Learn from others' mistakes, or your toes will pay the price. You develop little tricks to survive the cold. Keep moving constantly. Wiggle your toes. Curl your fingers inside your gloves. Hug a neighbor for warmth. Social distancing is not a medieval concept. Reuse old blankets. Add straw. Layer everything you own. And yet, despite every precaution, extremities remain cold. Your ears burn. Your nose drips. Your hands sting. The cold is relentless. Sometimes it's almost funny. You look down at your straw-stuffed boots and realize, yes, this is your life. Tasks vary depending on the village. Some days you repair the roof of a hut, carefully prying frozen shingles into place. Some days you split firewood, hands raw and blistering. Some days you're dragging carts of hay across slippery roads. Every task is an exercise in endurance. Every tool and object is heavier in the cold. And every moment teaches patience. Winter moves slowly, and so do you, frozen fingers and all. Water is scarce in winter. Wells freeze, rivers ice over. Buckets are heavy, brittle, and often half frozen. You chip ice carefully, because breaking it too quickly risks shattering the wood or metal container. Fire is constant concern. One small lapse, and you'll spend the rest of the day shaking in the cold. Even bringing water or starting a fire becomes a mini battle. And yet, peasants persevere because failure means exposure, frostbite, or worse. Imagine doing this every single day. You wake, you dress, you trudge, you work, you eat, you survive. No modern comforts, no heated floors to make it bearable. Comment below if you've ever done hard physical work in sub-zero temperatures. How does it compare? I bet not even close. By late morning, you're exhausted, cold, and hungry. But work isn't done. You check animals, tend crops, repair tools, and plan for the next cold night. Every movement is calculated. Every action conserves energy, protects against frostbite, and ensures survival. Even small mistakes like dropping a tool, slipping on ice, spilling water can have consequences. Survival is a full-time job, every day in every detail. Sometimes there are brief moments to pause, maybe a tiny sip of lukewarm ale, maybe a bite of stale bread. You huddle against a wall or lean on a fence, letting your body rest, feeling the sun on your face if it appears at all. Even for a few minutes, it's enough to remember winter is harsh, but the sun still rises, the animals still eat, and life goes on. By now, you've survived morning and early afternoon. You've battled cold, fatigue, and frustration. You've interacted with your neighbors, tended animals, and learned the small tricks that keep life moving. But now, evening comes, and with evening comes the true test: food, fire, and surviving the coldest nights. The sky darkens quickly in winter. You glance outside and see pale moonlight reflecting off snow, making everything look like a world painted in silver and shadow. The wind picks up, carrying with it an icy bite that slices through wool, straw, and bone alike. And inside your tiny hut, the fire, your only defense against the cold, needs attention. Every spark counts. First task, fuel. You need wood, straw, or whatever flammable material you can scavenge. Firewood is frozen solid. Logs are stiff and heavy. You chip at frozen kindling, praying it'll catch before your fingers turn to ice. And here's the challenge. A peasant's fireplace isn't a roaring, controlled hearth. No, it's often a small pit, maybe with a crude stone surround. Smoke curls lazily, sometimes into the room, sometimes out the chimney if you're lucky. Every moment without fire is a moment spent shivering, teeth chattering like castanets. You strike flint and steel, sparks fly, and nothing. Again and again. Eventually, finally, a small flame appears. You coax it, shelter it, blow gently. Careful, because one too strong puff and it dies. This is life in microcosm, small victories, constant vigilance, and shivering despair. Once the fire survives, it's time for dinner, or more accurately, sustenance. Cooking in winter is a nightmare. Pots are frozen cold. Ingredients, if you didn't even call them that, are hard, frozen, or leftovers from days past. Stew is the staple, a mix of grains, root vegetables, and, if lucky, some meat. Sometimes it's thin, watery, almost soup-like. Other times it's thick, chewy, and filled with surprise ice crystals. You drop the pot near the fire. The flames lick its sides, but it takes hours to heat. You stir with a wooden spoon that burns your fingers on one side and freezes them on the other. Every bite is a balance of warmth and frost, flavor and survival. And the smell? Imagine a mixture of smoke, slightly spoiled vegetables, and a hint of meat that's seen better days. Mealtime is rarely formal. You sit on the edge of the straw bed or squat near the fire, holding your bowl in hands that barely feel it. No silverware, no napkins. Sometimes you share your food with animals, cats, dogs, or even a stray chicken that snuck inside. Survival trumps etiquette. Conversation is minimal. People eat quickly, quietly, focusing on warmth, chewing, and energy conservation. Every bite is precious. Food is not a luxury. It's a weapon against frostbite, exhaustion, and despair. After eating, fire becomes life itself. You stoke it, add more wood, and shift logs to maximize heat. Too close, and you risk smoke inhalation. Too far, and your toes start to freeze again. You watch the flames dance, hypnotic and dangerous. The fire is also social. Families gather, huddling close, whispering stories or muttering complaints about the day. It's warmth, light, and entertainment all in one. Without it, the night is just endless, freezing darkness. Nighttime chores continue even after the main workday. Animals must be checked again. Water must be brought in. Roofs or walls repaired if snow threatens collapse. Every small task feels monumental. Your hands ache, your feet are numb, your back is sore, and yet the work must be done. It's exhausting, mentally, physically, spiritually, but every action is survival. Every log stacked, every animal fed, every water bucket brought in. It's the difference between making it through the night and joining the ranks of frostbitten misfortune. Finally, night arrives. Time to sleep, or attempt to. Beds are straw pallets. Blankets are thin, patchy, and often full of insects. Family members huddle together for warmth. Your dog might curl at your feet. A goat? Maybe. Survival is often shared body heat. You curl up, trying to trap warmth in your core. Your extremities, fingers, toes, ears, remain icy. You stuff extra clothing into boots and gloves. You wrap yourself in a blanket and pray the wind doesn't find a way in through cracks in walls. Every night is a balance between warmth and suffocation. And yes, sometimes the fire dies in the night, forcing desperate attempts to relight it in darkness. Imagine this: the smell of smoke and damp straw, the icy draft seeping into every corner, the muffled sounds of wind through thatched roofs, the crunch of snow outside as someone checks the animals for the last time. Can you feel it? Comment below if you've ever slept in a room where you could see your own breath, because that's reality for a medieval peasant, and every night they did it, winter after winter, year after year. Some nights were worse than others. Storms could block roads, collapse roofs, or bury animals. Food could freeze solid. Fires could go out. Villagers sometimes had to share every scrap of warmth just to survive. There are stories of peasants huddling in barns with animals, using them as heaters. Others would take turns staying awake to watch over the fire, because one unattended flame could mean death by cold. It's brutal, relentless, and terrifying, but also incredibly resourceful. Peasants were inventive. They'd use hot stones to heat food when fire was weak. They'd bury vegetables in straw or ashes to keep them from freezing. Water could be melted in small quantities to prevent it from freezing instantly. Meals were minimal, repetitive, but clever. You learn quickly that ingenuity is survival. Even if the result tastes questionable, it keeps you alive. Fire isn't just warmth, it's community. Families huddle close. Children listen to whispered stories. Elders share advice about winter survival. Songs, games, and quiet laughter become precious entertainment. Imagine your modern living room. Now imagine it without walls, heat, or running water. That fire is everything: comfort, protection, and social hub rolled into one flickering flame. The night is full of hazards. Frostbite is invisible until it strikes. Smoke inhalation can make breathing painful. Roofs creak under the weight of snow. Animals stir, sometimes stepping on sleeping children. Even a simple cough in the wrong place can spread illness, which is far more dangerous than cold alone. Surviving medieval winter isn't just about warmth, it's about vigilance, observation, and endless small decisions. Mental survival is crucial. Stories, prayers, songs, and small games distract from discomfort. Peasants shared jokes, sometimes cruel, sometimes dark, to cope with relentless cold. Imagination becomes vital. Visualizing warmth, thinking of spring, remembering food, anything to give hope. The body can survive extreme cold if the mind doesn't give up. Even in extreme conditions, humor persists. Imagine someone slipping on ice, falling into frozen mud, and immediately being scolded for not working fast enough. Or the dog that steals a chunk of frozen bread while the family argues about whose turn it is to check the fire. Medieval life was harsh, yes, but it was also human, messy, and occasionally hilarious in retrospect. As the night deepens, you settle in again, checking the fire, securing blankets, repositioning animals. You breathe slowly, careful not to let your fingers touch cold surfaces. Every night is a negotiation with winter, warmth, comfort, and survival balanced on a thin edge. So that's the night. Food barely enough, fire constantly tending, body shivering, mind alert. Surviving medieval winter required creativity, community, and stubborn resilience. Community was everything. People shared food, firewood, and warmth. If one hut had extra straw or blankets, the family might lend it to a neighbor. If someone was sick, others helped with chores. Huddling together wasn't just about comfort, it was literally about life and death. Imagine trying to keep your fire going while also helping carry water for a neighbor whose well froze. That was normal. And while it sounds exhausting, it also created bonds. Villagers weren't just surviving the cold, they were surviving together. When work was done, or during rare breaks, people found ways to entertain themselves. Music, storytelling, and simple games became essential coping mechanisms. Someone might drum on a wooden table or use scraps to create makeshift instruments. Children played with snow, while adults whispered ghost stories or sang folk songs. It wasn't luxury, it was survival. A shared laugh or a song kept the mind warm when the body was frozen. Humor and creativity were as vital as clothing or fire. Peasants also relied on clever, often improvised survival hacks. Ever heard of straw socks? They'd stuff boots with straw for insulation, or hot stone heating, where stones were heated in the fire and placed under bedding. Even simple observations, like curling up near a wall to avoid drafts or layering clothing strategically, were life-saving. Superstitions played a role too. Some believed certain charms or rituals would ward off winter illnesses. Modern science might roll its eyes, but for peasants, belief and action together could boost morale, and sometimes that made the difference between survival and tragedy. Humor was a critical part of community survival. Imagine a neighbor slipping on ice, landing in the snow, then trying to laugh it off while everyone else hoots. Or someone's boots bursting open in the cold, straw flying everywhere, creating a mini winter snowstorm indoors. Stories like these were shared nightly, growing taller with each retelling. The humor wasn't just entertainment, it was a social glue, a way to remind each other that even in despair, humans could find absurdity, laughter, and resilience. Food was also a social affair. Sometimes villagers would combine ingredients to make a larger stew, ensuring everyone got something warm. One family might contribute grains, another a root vegetable, someone else a scrap of meat. Cooking together also meant tending fires collectively. Keeping the flame alive was easier when multiple people fed it, rotated tasks, and shared strategies for warmth. Communal meals weren't gourmet, they were survival strategy in edible form. Beyond food and warmth, villagers helped each other with daily tasks. Building fences, repairing roofs under snow loads, chopping firewood or hauling water, all were shared. A lone peasant would collapse under the weight of these tasks, but together, even a small village could weather extreme conditions. And often, creativity thrived in these situations. Someone might rig a pulley system for water buckets. Another would invent a method for stacking wood efficiently to preserve heat. Shared problem-solving wasn't a luxury, it was life-saving. Even shelters weren't isolated. Huts were often grouped closely to conserve heat, share windbreaks, and make emergency assistance easier. If a hut collapsed under snow, neighbors pitched in immediately. Walls, roofs, and even doorways became communal projects. Imagine a line of villagers shoving hay bales together, patching cracks with mud and straw while the wind howls outside. Survival required collaboration as much as individual endurance. Clothing was another community matter. People mended each other's garments, shared extra tunics, or even traded scraps of wool to improve insulation. Socks, gloves, and hats were passed around like precious commodities. This wasn't charity in the modern sense, it was mutual interest. Helping a neighbor survive increased the chances everyone survived. A cold neighbor might not tend your fire properly. A healthy neighbor ensured your village functioned. Survival was social as much as personal. Knowledge was communal. Experienced villagers taught the young how to layer clothing effectively, start fires quickly, or prepare food that wouldn't freeze instantly. Elderly members passed down folk wisdom, what we might call life hacks today. Every winter, new strategies were tried, shared, and refined. Peasants learned quickly. Sharing knowledge saved lives. And because winters were long and brutal, those who didn't listen, well, their story often ended quickly. As darkness fell, communal rituals continued. People gathered around fires, telling tales, singing, or reciting prayers. Sometimes a simple rhythmic clap or chant helped maintain morale while everyone huddled together against the cold. Children would listen eye wide, learning not just stories but practical survival tips embedded in the tales. Humor, superstition, and instruction all blended, creating social cohesion and mental resilience. Psychological survival was just as important as physical. Villagers leaned on each other for support. Complaints, jokes, gossip, and shared frustrations acted like informal therapy. Even simple interactions, checking on a sick neighbor, offering a scrap of bread, helping carry a firewood bundle, strengthened bonds. Social resilience was survival. Isolation in winter could be deadly. Creativity thrived in necessity. People made games from scraps, carved toys from wood, improvised musical instruments, and created small rituals to distract from hunger and cold. One peasant might turn a frozen puddle into a game. Another would weave straw into little creatures for children. These acts weren't just for fun, they maintained morale and gave people a sense of control in an uncontrollable environment. Stories of absurdity and hardship abounded. A goat escaping into the frozen river, villagers slipping while carrying hay, or someone mistaking frozen porridge for stone. These tales were retold nightly, laughter echoing despite frost-chapped lips. Humor wasn't optional, it was survival psychology. Villagers survived not just because they had straw and firewood, but because they could laugh even when teeth chattered uncontrollably.
So, you've eaten what passes for dinner, maintained your fire, and huddled with your neighbors. Your body is cold, stiff, and exhausted. But here's a little secret. Surviving winter isn't just about warmth, food, or clothing. It's about your mind. Imagine staring out the window, or what passes for a window, at endless snow, gray skies, and the same frozen landscape day after day. The monotony is oppressive. The cold seeps not just into your bones, but into your thoughts. And if your mind falters, so does your will to survive. Winter plays tricks on the mind. Days are short, nights are long. Light is scarce. Darkness falls early, dragging you into hours of cold, silent monotony. Your body craves warmth. Your stomach craves calories, but your brain craves hope. Depression, anxiety, and fatigue were constant companions. Peasants didn't have modern therapy, coffee, or even reliable social contact beyond the village. Yet somehow they endured. How? By developing mental strategies that we would recognize today as resilience training, medieval style. Stories were more than entertainment, they were lifelines. Elders recounted tales of past winters, heroic hunts, and miraculous survival. Some were cautionary. Don't fall into frozen water. Don't hoard food carelessly. Don't ignore frostbite. Others were humorous, almost absurd to lift spirits. Children listened wide-eyed, learning not only lessons but coping mechanisms. Adults remembered the stories to distract themselves from the cold, to create a mental warmth, and to remind themselves that hardship could be endured and even survived with ingenuity. Humor was essential. Imagine the absurdity of a goat stealing frozen bread while a neighbor slips on ice, crashing into a pile of firewood. In the cold, these moments became comedy gold. Laughter wasn't just a social tool, it was a survival mechanism. When the body shivers and the mind fears, humor reassures. It signals you are still human, you can endure, you can find joy even in misery. Comment below if you've ever laughed when everything felt bleak. That's the same instinct medieval peasants relied on. Routine was another mental strategy. Daily chores, feeding animals, carrying water, tending fires became rituals. Repetition provided structure. Even monotonous tasks gave the mind a framework to anticipate the next step, reducing anxiety and panic. Peasants developed mental maps: step here, shovel there, stir the pot, check the fire. Each repeated action anchored them against despair. Modern psychologists call this mindfulness. Peasants just called it survival. Imagination was vital. With little stimulation, peasants retreated into stories, dreams, and fantasies. They imagined spring, green fields, full harvests, and warm meals. These mental escapes gave hope, and hope kept the body moving. Without hope, every frozen day would feel like the last. Imagination was mental insulation, protecting them from the relentless cold that surrounded and invaded everything. Support from neighbors and family strengthened the mind as much as the body. Sharing tasks, exchanging stories, and comforting the sick created a web of psychological support. Survival was a collective effort, not just feeding each other, but encouraging each other. Even small gestures, a shared blanket, a whispered joke, a nod of understanding, reinforced that you were not alone. In extreme winter, loneliness was as dangerous as frostbite. Superstition and folk beliefs were surprisingly useful. Charms, rituals, and prayers gave peasants a sense of control. If I sprinkle salt around the door, the spirits won't let frost in. If I wear this charm, I won't catch illness. Modern science might scoff, but in a world where the weather could kill you, belief itself was a coping strategy. It structured daily life, reduced anxiety, and gave meaning to otherwise random hardship. Mental survival often depended on a little faith, ritual, or superstition.
Imagine weeks of gray skies, short sunlight, and relentless cold. seasonal depression was real. To combat it, peasants relied on work, social bonds, and mental tricks. Singing while working, joking during chores, telling stories at night. These weren't luxuries, they were defenses against despair. Sometimes it involved sheer distraction, focusing on a single task until nightfall, repeating a mantra, or creating small personal games to pass time. Modern life might offer video games or streaming, but medieval peasants had only their ingenuity and focus. Visualization was a common tool. Peasants imagined warmth, imagined spring, imagined future meals. The mind could summon mental heat. Close your eyes and picture a roaring fire, even if your body is freezing. Think of a warm bowl of porridge, even if the current one is icy. These mental tricks reduced panic, gave energy, and helped maintain morale. Survival wasn't just lifting a shovel, it was convincing yourself you could endure until the next sunrise. Fear was constant. Would the fire die? Would water freeze? Would the storm collapse the roof? Peasants learned to compartmentalize, one problem at a time, fix this, then that. Worrying about everything at once would paralyze action. They also accepted uncertainty as a fact of life. Some nights, all they could do was huddle, hold on, and trust that the next day brought another chance. Mental flexibility was as critical as physical endurance. Community gatherings weren't just social, they were therapeutic. Sharing grief, sharing stories, and collectively acknowledging hardships normalized suffering. If someone lost a goat or a tool, it wasn't just an individual loss, it was a lesson for all. These communal rituals reinforced resilience. People didn't just survive because they were strong, they survived because the group was stronger together. Humor persisted even in extreme mental stress. Absurdity, exaggeration, and playful storytelling kept the mind alert. A frozen pot becomes a magical artifact, a goat becomes a mischievous trickster, and the cold, well, it becomes a shared adversary everyone can laugh at. Laughter, repeated nightly, was mental armor. It reminded peasants that while they couldn't control the winter, they could control their responses to it. As night deepens, peasants reflect. What worked today? What needs fixing tomorrow? Mental rehearsal prepares them for the challenges ahead. Firewood arranged for efficiency, food rationed, clothing repaired, tasks delegated. Every mental calculation increases survival odds. Sleep becomes a careful balance, enough to rest, but alert enough to respond if the fire dies, the wind howls, or an animal stirs. Mental vigilance is continuous. Winter survival isn't just physical, it's psychological. Humor, imagination, rituals, community, and resilience of mind are what make life bearable. Peasants survived the cold not just because of fire or wool, but because they understood the power of the mind. We've explored the harsh physical conditions and the mental endurance required to survive medieval winters. But survival wasn't just brute force or sheer stubbornness. It was science, ingenuity, and observation, medieval style. Step back into the village. Snow piles higher than your knees. Wind whistles between huts. Your fingers are numb, your boots heavy with ice. But somehow, centuries of trial, error, and human ingenuity have left you tools, clothing, and shelters to make survival possible. And today, we're going to break it all down. First, clothing wasn't just decoration, It was technology. Peasants relied on multiple layers: linen closest to the skin to wick moisture, wool on top for insulation, leather for windproofing, and sometimes even straw or extra padding stuffed inside garments. Each layer had a purpose. Linen kept you dry, wool trapped air, creating heat, leather blocked wind, straw, weirdly enough, added extra insulation. Modern cold-weather jackets might look fancy, but medieval layering was function perfected through necessity, and it worked most of the time. Feet, hands, and heads were at constant risk. Boots were stuffed with straw to insulate toes, sometimes lined with extra cloth. Gloves were layered or patched together. Hats were essential, and some peasants even wrapped cloth around ears and necks to prevent frostbite. One clever trick: some villagers would pre-warm rocks in the fire and tuck them inside boots or blankets. Not very elegant, but brutally effective. Extremities stayed warmer and survival odds increased. You might scoff, but it's genius thermal management without modern materials. Now let's talk huts. Crude, yes, but efficient. Walls were often wattle and daub, sticks and mud to provide windbreaks. Roofs thatched with straw or reeds insulated against snow. Doors were small to keep out drafts. Windows, rare, tiny, and covered with oiled cloth or animal hide. Huts were compact for a reason. Smaller spaces retain heat more effectively. Huddling with family or even animals made the interior livable despite freezing winds outside. Every design choice was survival science, refined over centuries. Fireplaces were the heartbeat of survival. Simple hearths, often stone-lined, were positioned strategically. Smoke had to escape without letting too much heat out. Villagers learned the delicate art of fuel management. Add too much and your smoke chokes you. Add too little and your fire dies, along with your hope. Some huts had clever vents or reflective surfaces using clay or stone to direct heat efficiently. Peasants weren't engineers in the modern sense, but centuries of observation gave them the kind of trial and error knowledge that rivaled modern thermal science.
Food survival was also an applied science. Peasants learned which vegetables could survive the frost, how to store grains in cool, dry spaces to prevent spoilage, and how to use salt or smoke to preserve meat. Cooking methods were adapted to winter constraints. Thick stews retained heat longer. Hot stones helped warm frozen water. Pots were often partially buried near the fire to slowly thaw ingredients without wasting energy. Every step was optimized for limited fuel and harsh conditions. Water management was brutal. Wells froze, rivers iced over. Peasants developed clever methods, breaking ice in sections, using heated containers, or melting snow efficiently without losing precious fuel. Some villages had small reservoirs insulated with straw to prevent total freezing. It was careful, methodical, and exhausting work, but survival depended on it. Modern plumbing, luxury. Medieval ingenuity, necessity. Animals weren't just food, they were heaters. Cows, goats, chickens, even dogs provided warmth when huddled inside the hut. Body heat helped raise ambient temperature. Straw bedding absorbed moisture and retained warmth. This wasn't a cozy lifestyle choice, it was a deliberate survival tactic. Every animal inside the hut contributed calories to the ecosystem of warmth, keeping humans just barely comfortable enough to endure the night. Travel in winter was dangerous. Snow and ice made paths treacherous. Peasants adapted by adding straw or cloth to shoe soles for traction, using staffs to balance on ice, and scouting routes to avoid hidden hazards. These weren't luxuries, they were survival innovations. Each adaptation was a response to risk. Fall on ice and injury could be fatal in a remote village, especially when temperatures plunged. Emergency strategies were vital. Buried food, hidden firewood caches, snow-insulated storage, and even small personal shelters were all tactics peasants used to survive unexpected storms. Some huts were designed with secondary sleeping areas or partitions to conserve heat. Some families kept extra straw or clothing hidden for worst-case scenarios. It was a constant balance of resource management and preparation. Many innovations were simple, ingenious, and iterative. Layering clothes, optimizing hut design, combining human and animal heat, reusing water, creating improvised insulation, all these practices weren't theoretical. They were developed over generations of trial, error, and observation. Every peasant, knowingly or not, was a participant in a long experiment in thermal physics, survival engineering, and resource management. Each winter improved techniques for the next. Even tools were adapted for cold. Metal handles were wrapped in cloth or straw to prevent frostbite. Wooden handles were carved to minimize contact and improve grip. Cooking implements were designed to maximize heat retention. Everything from small knives to large axes reflected an understanding of material properties under freezing conditions. Survival demanded both skill and clever engineering. Step back and think about it. With no modern technology, no heating systems, and no insulated clothing stores, medieval peasants survived winters that would kill most modern humans in days. They did it with observation, ingenuity, and relentless trial and error. Every log stacked, every layer of clothing, every small adjustment in fire management reflected centuries of accumulated practical knowledge. Science wasn't a theory, it was lived, embodied, and necessary for life. So far, we've explored daily survival, mental strategies, and clever medieval ingenuity. But now, we're venturing into the extremes, the winters that broke villages, the blizzards that trapped peasants in their huts for weeks, and the famine conditions that tested every ounce of human endurance. Imagine snow piled higher than the rooftops, wind cutting like knives, rivers frozen solid, and food dwindling to nothing. This isn't a storybook winter, it's survival at the absolute edge. Record-breaking winters were merciless. Historical accounts describe winters where rivers froze completely and peasants had to walk miles across ice to reach neighboring villages. Snowstorms could last days without pause. Temperatures dropped so low that even firewood became brittle, snapping under the weight of frost. Imagine standing outside, boots sinking into deep snow, wind howling, feeling like your body is being peeled away layer by layer. Every step is a calculation. Every breath hurts. And you're not alone. Everyone is facing the same frozen battlefield. Food scarcity was another relentless enemy. Fields were buried under snow or destroyed by frost. Livestock perished. Grain stores froze or were eaten faster than anticipated. Villagers were forced to ration everything, sometimes to the point of eating roots, bark, or even small animals previously considered taboo. Imagine sitting around a fire, staring at a thin, icy stew, calculating how long it will last before sunrise tomorrow. Hunger gnaws, but you must conserve strength for the cold.
Every bite becomes a tactical decision. There are countless accounts of extreme survival. Families huddled together for days without leaving the hut. Neighbors shared what little food they had. Some traveled dangerous frozen roads to trade or fetch supplies. Children slept wrapped in straw with animals, body heat their only shield. One story tells of a village that buried grain under straw to keep it from freezing solid and rationed it carefully, meal by meal, until spring. Without planning, cooperation, and extreme discipline, they would have perished. Peasants became inventors in extreme conditions. Snow was used as insulation around doors or windows. Fires were kept small but strategic, burning continuously. Clothing was layered in every possible configuration: hats, gloves, multiple tunics, even layers of wet cloth to trap body heat once dried by the fire. Every action was calculated. Improvisation wasn't just clever, it was essential. One misstep in judgment, one failed fire, one lost supply of food, and the consequences were deadly. During the harshest winters, communities had to work like clockwork. Families shared resources, rotated duties, and monitored vulnerable neighbors. Elders and experienced villagers directed efforts: who collects firewood, who tends animals, who checks on the sick. Even small acts of coordination mattered. A single mismanaged ration could mean frostbite or death. Survival was a collective effort, and communication, trust, and planning became as valuable as food or fire. Faith played a central role during famine and extreme weather. Villagers prayed for the sun, for melted snow, for bountiful harvests to come. Churches sometimes became hubs for distributing food or organizing communal support. Belief was a psychological lifeline. Knowing that there was a higher power, or at least that their struggles were shared in the eyes of the divine, helped peasants endure the relentless hardships of winter. Every decision carried risk. Traveling to another village for supplies meant navigating frozen rivers and hidden snowdrifts. Eating questionable food meant risking illness. Even choosing how to ration wood or straw could determine life or death. Peasants developed a kind of extreme risk management. They learned to weigh every choice carefully, improvising solutions and constantly prioritizing survival over comfort or convenience. In desperate times, peasants innovated wildly. Some dug snow shelters or used underground cellars to preserve food. Others crafted makeshift stoves from clay, heated rocks for warmth, or insulated bedding with layers of straw and animal skins. These adaptations were often temporary but ingenious, highlighting the resourcefulness required to endure long, deadly winters. Survival wasn't glamorous, it was clever, desperate, and relentless. Stories from historical records are staggering. Families surviving weeks on meager rations, traveling miles across frozen terrain, and tending animals despite frostbite. Some villages survived record snowfalls and famine by pooling resources, rationing strategically, and improvising every day. These stories remind us that survival was about endurance, creativity, and community. Each winter tested not just physical strength, but human ingenuity. Even in extreme conditions, mental resilience was crucial. People found hope in small victories, a fire that lasted longer than expected, a neighbor bringing extra food, a day of calm weather. Humor and storytelling continued to be vital. Jokes, songs, and playful antics lifted morale. Psychological survival was as critical as physical survival. Without it, even the best strategies would fail. Extreme winters forced peasants to innovate, cooperate, and think strategically. They learned to ration food, preserve warmth, share resources, and make difficult decisions under constant stress. It was survival science in action: trial, error, observation, and adaptation. These experiences left a legacy of techniques, wisdom, and resilience that shaped communities for generations. Step back and consider this. Modern humans have central heating, grocery stores, insulated clothing, and vehicles. Medieval peasants had ice, snow, hunger, and wind. Yet they survived. Not because of magic, but because they adapted. They turned scarcity into creativity, isolation into community, and despair into strategy. The human spirit, when pressed to the limits, is astonishingly resourceful. Now, let's explore the legacy of winter survival. How these techniques, habits, and stories influenced society, culture, and even the way modern survival strategies are shaped today. What can we learn from their relentless adaptation, and how did these survival strategies ripple through history into our modern world? First, the skills themselves became cultural memory. Layering clothes, insulating homes, rationing food, preserving livestock. These weren't just temporary fixes. They were traditions passed from generation to generation. Festivals, folk tales, and seasonal rituals often centered around surviving winter. Christmas, for example, originally aligned with the darkest days of winter and featured rituals to celebrate light, warmth, and community. These customs weren't arbitrary. They reflected practical survival instincts encoded into culture. The lessons learned from huts, thatched roofs, and wattle and daub walls influenced future building techniques. Villages were often laid out to minimize wind exposure and maximize heat retention. Even in cities centuries later, planners considered compact layouts, shared walls, and communal heating strategies, tiny echoes of medieval logic. So when you walk down a street with terraced houses or insulated cottages, you're seeing the distant descendants of centuries of survival science. Layering systems, wool insulation, and leather weatherproofing inspired later textile innovation. Medieval layering principles became the basis for modern outdoor clothing. That clever combination of moisture management, insulation, and wind protection is something we still follow in modern cold weather gear. The next time you zip into a down jacket, thank a medieval peasant who figured out straw, wool, and leather were the ultimate winter trifecta. Food preservation techniques survived too. Smoking meat, drying grains, salting fish, and fermenting vegetables all originated or were refined during harsh winters. These methods ensured communities could endure months without fresh harvests. Even modern culinary preservation owes a nod to these survival tactics. Winter scarcity taught humans efficiency, patience, and innovation in the kitchen, a lesson we still apply in fridges, freezers, and pantries. Mental survival, storytelling, humor, and ritual shaped not just immediate survival, but long-term cultural psychology. Folklore, songs, and communal rituals reinforced mental resilience. Communities that learned to laugh, plan, and work together were the ones that thrived. Today, psychologists recognize the value of these strategies. Humor, social support, routines, and shared purpose remain central to coping with stress and adversity.
Medieval peasants were early pioneers of survival psychology. Perhaps most importantly, winter survival reinforced the importance of community. Sharing resources, coordinating work, and supporting the vulnerable weren't moral luxuries, they were necessities. This shaped social structures, village governance, and communal decision-making. The logic was simple. A strong, cooperative village survives, a fragmented one perishes. Modern disaster response and community support systems owe more than a little to these medieval lessons. Stories of survival, extreme winters, and communal triumphs became legends. Tales of resilience were told to inspire younger generations and codify practical knowledge. Even humor from hardship made it into oral tradition, emphasizing that adversity can be endured and sometimes even laughed at. These narratives preserved strategies and mindset long after the snow melted. Modern survival guides echo medieval principles. Layered clothing, compact shelters, food rationing, insulation techniques, and group coordination are all rooted in centuries-old practice. When you see modern mountaineers, explorers, or survivalists, they're following principles honed in huts, fields, and forests hundreds of years ago. The difference: modern materials make it easier, but the logic is the same. Think about it. Humans survived centuries of bitter winters with minimal technology. They innovated, adapted, and endured. Today, we have central heating, insulated homes, grocery stores, and emergency services, but the blueprint of survival comes from these medieval experiments in human endurance. It's a testament to creativity, community, and resilience under pressure. Even outside literal survival, there's a lesson for us. Planning ahead, sharing resources, maintaining routines, and supporting each other aren't just medieval tactics, they're timeless strategies for resilience. In a metaphorical sense, we face winter in many forms: economic hardship, personal loss, or global crises. Medieval survival strategies remind us that ingenuity, preparation, and social bonds are key to weathering life's storms. When you layer your clothes on a cold day, cook with preserved ingredients, or work together with your community, you're participating in a living legacy. The wisdom of medieval peasants still lives in our culture, our infrastructure, our psychology, and our approach to adversity. It's incredible to think that people with no electricity, no central heating, and no modern tools survived winters that would make most of us give up in days, and that we benefit from their hard-earned lessons without even realizing it. So, as we close this journey through frozen fields, smoky huts, scarce meals, and human ingenuity, take a moment to reflect. Survival isn't just about strength or tools, it's about mind, community, adaptability, and hope. The coldest nights taught humans resilience, creativity, and cooperation, and those lessons echo through time, from medieval villages to modern life. Next time you feel winter's bite, remember, the peasants survived worse with nothing but determination, wit, and each other. And maybe, just maybe, you can survive your day a little better too.